All right, welcome everybody. Shane Carter here, Hampshire Capital, joined as always with our VP of Investor Relations, Eddie Austin, and our business partner here at Hampshire Capital, Nick Bouquet. Welcome, guys. So this is part 3 of our underwriting series. Part 1, we went through neighborhood analysis. Part 2, we went through rent comp analysis, and here we are at part 3. So Nick, jump in. Tell us what happens next.
Yeah, well, this is where all that financial modeling fun starts. Yes. Which, is a subject close to my heart. So basically, as we work through a deal, kind of coming into our top of our funnel, we've taken a look at the neighborhood, we've taken a look at the rent comps, we like the neighborhood dynamics, we think there's a revenue story on the rent side of things and an opportunity to deploy, our typical business plan, which is really driven, focused on kind of that value add renovation program to really drive net operating income and revenue and ultimately drive value to the investors. And then it's really about sort of putting those high level pieces into the model. And the only other major piece we haven't really talked about yet is, looking at the trailing expenses and starting to underwrite the expense operational side of the business. So at the end of the rent comp analysis piece, we've got a pretty good sense of in-place rents, where we want to push rents. And then it's a matter of kind of taking those conclusions, putting them into the model, and starting to understand how we're going to build that revenue over a period of time, which is typically kind of 18 to 24 months, depending on the size of the asset and what the capital plan is for the property. And then concurrently kind of looking at the historical trailing expenses and seeing what we want to carry forward in our underwriting for how we want to operate the expenses of the property. So that kind of 1 + 1 gets us to our NOI projection over the life of the investment. And I think I think it's important it's one thing to sort of look at some rents and conclude that there's some upside, but you really got to think strategically around, how do you build that revenue over time? A lot of underwriting, you're seeing people grow, in my opinion, I think grow revenue way too fast. And so for us, we try to be conservative on how we build that revenue. And it's really down to kind of construction pace and how quickly we think we can renovate and turn units and mark them up to market, either through organic leasing and renewals or through the value add renovation interior program and exterior plan.
It sure sounds like a business plan, what we're talking about. And, I've had so many people that's come to me because, I'm a business owner, and I've had people come to me and they think in real estate that there's no business plan, that a business plan is just something you take the SBA to get a loan. And that's not true at all. We can all attest to that's, what you just said at the high level is the start of the business plan, correct, Nick?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, essentially the underwriting piece of it is a financial expression of the business plan, right? So it's, it's a matter of, the numbers, this is essentially our investors are buying a stream of cash flows. And what we're trying to do is think strategically from a business plan perspective, how we're going to grow those cash flows over time. And the model just simply lets us look at that in an honest way and test a variety of scenarios and see, given our operating knowledge of these properties and our, bringing in our asset management experience, bringing in our construction experience, and understanding kind of when all those pieces come together, what does it really look like to build this revenue out and execute on the plan? Yeah,
it's interesting that, somebody said this to me, a number of years ago, and it really stuck with me that, we buy assets and we buy, multifamily assets specifically, but really what each of them is their own little unique business with their own set of employees and their own unique set of circumstances and location. And these are actual functioning businesses with income and expenses. And we just happen to, buy multiples of them, right? So each asset is its own business. And so therefore you have to have a business plan for every business that you own. In this case, we own, businesses that are backed by assets, and our assets, in fact. So yeah, Nick, let's jump in. So let's jump into, maybe one aspect at a time. So you've got a renovation plan. Let's dive into that a little bit. How do you create a renovation plan? How do you think about vacancies and renovations and the cadence and speed of renovations? And do you factor in how long it takes to do the renovations and how long the unit's down? And just let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So, when we think about renovations on these projects, it's kind of, there's kind of two tiers. There's kind of two buckets. There's exterior and amenities, and then there's interiors. The interior, all of that scope is largely driven by what we're seeing in the submarket from the comps and what we're seeing in the submarket from demographics. So we're trying to essentially, you can think about these capital plans as, that's kind of our product, right? And so we're trying to take an existing product and create a new product to serve the customer base that we've identified with our demographic and market analysis. And so, the interior scope of work, often we're never going into the market and kind of making the comp and making the market, right? So we oftentimes have proven, we have other comps in the market that have done an interior program. We may have a bunch of units with old appliances, old flooring, old fixtures, a dated feel. We've got 2, 3, 4 comps that have done upgraded interiors. And so we'll go in and do it. We have our own twists and things we like to do, but basically we're going to essentially match what the market's doing in a lot of ways. And so we develop that scope, we price that scope based on our own pricing knowledge, and then we take it to the market too to sort of figure out kind of the unit costs there. And then on the exteriors, there's a couple of buckets. There's kind of deferred maintenance, which is just, CapEx that you need, capital renovations you need to do to make sure the property is physically sound from a bones perspective and a systems perspective. And then there's exterior, there's amenities, which I'll throw in that bucket too, which is, features the tenant would want to enhance their experience and help to support the overall interior rent bump. So most of your interior work is going to drive the revenue side of it, but that's heavily supported by what you're doing on the exterior and what you're doing with the amenities. It all has to kind of work together.
That's right.
To create that new product that you're bringing to the market.
And that's why we always attack the exteriors first. And we show that value in the asset to the existing residents and future residents, because it's the first pop. It's the wow factor. It shows everybody. It's very, very visible, right? It's hard to see what's inside every single unit, but when you come in and you redo the landscaping and the signage and you rebrand and you attack the amenities and you make beautiful poolscapes and you're really dressing up the outside of a property, everybody sees that, whether you're driving by the asset or pulling in as a potential resident. And so that's why that's always part of our business plan is you hit the exteriors first while you're concurrently building up your interior renovation program.
Exactly. And we strive to have, we model and underwrite to have the exterior work done in a 12-month block, but typically we're getting it done in 4 to 6 months. Yeah. So, day after closing, we've got something starting at the property to start to show our capital investment on the exterior and amenity side of things.
Yep, that's right.
The units we typically, they'll take anywhere, depending on the property size, again, 18 to 24 months. And that's at a clip of roughly, anywhere from 7 to 15 units a month, depending on contractor capacity, project size, interior scope of work. And that interior scope, typically takes 2 or 3 weeks to complete. We underwrite 2 months of downtime. So essentially a month for renovations and a month for releasing. So we're building into our model on top of sort of baseline market vacancy, additional vacancy for units offline during construction. So just to sort of, account for that, even though we may not actually see that in reality, because we may have enough market vacancy to cover those renovations, we're putting in a little extra buffer to account for unit downtime for construction.
Yeah, and let's dive a little bit into that further. So those are all great data points. So let's say we have a 400 unit asset and we have an average 8% vacancy rate, right? That's going to be 32 units a month that are vacant on a sort of rolling basis on average, right? Let's use that as a metric. I mean, are we renovating all 32 units, or how do we decide how many to renovate, and what happens to the units we don't renovate, and how does that work into the business plan?
Sure. Yeah. So, these projects are always a balancing act between managing renewals, managing new leases on unrenovated units, managing leases on renovated units. Yeah. And you don't want to go in and hit all 32 of those units in month one and have a bunch of brand new product on the market immediately. You want to phase it in over time. And so we're always, during that, that 18 to 24 month window, we're always sort of working through balancing okay, half the units maybe we'll just do a turn and release and bump up, 25, 50, $75 to market. And then the other balance of the units remaining will hit for renovations, for instance, or the ratio may not be 50-50, but just for this example. So and that comes down to, that's a function of understanding, the existing residents, the market, and kind of working very closely with our asset manager and the property management team to identify units for renovation, which are often the tougher units, rougher units, people who have been in leases longer, who maybe have not got a renovation bump. They may get a higher renewal notice to encourage them to move, to sort of create the opportunity to renovate their unit. Mm-hmm. And so that, we are on a month by month basis, on a sort of 90-day look forward. We're sort of looking at the rent roll, understanding lease expirations, and identifying the units that are the best candidates for renovations and the best units that are candidates for either renewals in a mark-to-market or a quick turn and a mark-to-market that way, through grab some additional income that way.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, people talk a lot about, the art and science of this. Like, that's a lot more of the art of the business, for sure. And that's a challenging thing to underwrite. And so I think that's why it's important to sort of pace your revenue build out in a conservative manner. So you're not assuming you're going to get you're not going to turn all the units in a year to renovated units. You're going to all of a sudden have 30% rent bump in 1 year. It's just,
it's not realistic. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you may do that. If you did it at that cadence, you probably wouldn't hit your renovated rents on day one. You probably wouldn't hit them with second or third generation leasing, because your amenities aren't updated, your exteriors aren't updated. You're putting a ton of brand new product on the market at one time, and then becomes a supply demand balancing act too, that you need to just continue to keep in mind.
Right. Exactly. And we're also constantly paying attention on a weekly basis to what leasing is doing, right? And sort of feedback from the market on how our renovated product is being received and leased up versus our lighter turns or mark-to-market units. And that, being conservative in the underwriting and ramping up a business plan for renovation allows us to pivot if needed, given the market feedback.
Yeah. And so we may ultimately get up to a cadence of, let's say our target renovation is 12 units per month. We'll probably step into that over the first few months of the project. So we do 6 in month 2, 8 in month 3, 10 in month 4, 12 in month 5, and then 12 we're up to plan, or whatever the number we conclude is the right pace.
Yeah.
Again, to not overwhelm the market, to make sure we have the right interior scope, we may need to make changes there to match the market. We may find out we can do less and still get our pro forma rent, right? So maybe we can tone some things back.
Yeah.
Save on CapEx, save on basis build. So it is, it's very much, you are definitely, those first few months of renovation, the way to do it correctly is to really test that market and feel it out. But, you don't want to wait too long to start the interior renovations too, because there's a lot to get through, and time is really, it's ultimately a business of time, right? In terms
That's
of
right.
how quick you build that revenue reasonably.
Yeah.
So,
speed of execution is very important.
I would say one of the most important things that I look at in a business plan is staying on your tack time. And that being that if we plan to renovate this many, we can look back at that business plan and see where we're at. Are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? Because in that, somewhere we probably have, when we are not turning units fast enough, that's a cost point. It's costing us to not have those finished. They are not online as fast as we want them to be, and now we're off basis from our business plan. So I think that's one of the most important things for me that I look at in a business plan is that timing, that we are realistic on, we have this many units that are make ready, and we have this many that are heavy renovations, and we have move in and move outs. And you can stay on track if you actually have a plan, and it's a well subjected plan. Yep.
All right, Nick, let's jump over to your OpEx discussion and sort of how do you do that OpEx analysis of, okay, well, we got the T12, we know what they're spending. How do you create what our business plan should be from an operating expense standpoint?
Yeah, so, it's not often today where we're finding deals, at least in the type of deals that we're buying and the size deal that we're buying, where we're finding deals with, glaring OpEx overages. I think there's There's usually some areas to trim, but a lot of these deals, if they're professionally managed, have a reasonable amount of OpEx. There's always things we can trim or reallocate into different buckets. I'd say, and we have a variety of kind of rules of thumb that we use for preliminary underwriting, but the budget's ultimately vetted and supported by a third-party PM's feedback and our asset management's feedback as well.
Mm-hmm.
So on a preliminary underwrite, I've got a variety of, and I do it I look at kind of historic per unit per year costs, and then I model on forward per unit per year costs on our projections.
Yep.
And so, for instance, we may see, R&M, repairs and maintenance and unit turns were $500 and $300 respectively. Well, if we know we're going to go in and put in $8,000 or $10,000 or $12,000 a unit in renovations, I think we can feel confident that we can pull those numbers down to $250 for R&M and $125 or $150 for interior turns. For example, that may not be the right numbers, but just to give an example of kind of looking at historics and thinking about, given our business plan, what can we do to adjust those numbers? Now, conversely, we may see that they're only spending $20,000 a year on marketing, and we know that if we're putting new product out and we are, going to be trying to push a new business plan, push rents, we may want to spend $50,000 a year on marketing, because that really may be what they should be spending, and really what we need to spend in order to get the rents and get the tenants into the property that we want. So, it's often more of a reallocation exercise than it is a kind of a broad-based trimming exercise. But if there are opportunities to trim, we certainly trim. But it's really just about making sure that our pro forma OpEx operating numbers are in line and will support the business plan.
Yep.
And so it's just it's a review of kind of where we've been, understanding what they're doing now, but then really applying kind of our operating model and our business plan needs to those forecasted numbers.
Sure.
And that's on the controllable side of things. You've got the uncontrollables, which is utilities, taxes, and expenses primarily. And those you have less control over just because they're uncontrollable by nature.
Yeah.
But we're always underwriting a tax bump. In this environment, we have to generally underwrite some kind of meaningful insurance increase. And so, again, you found a bunch of savings in the controllables, but you're going to get some level of offset in the non-controllables.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of stepping back big picture, we'll look at, there's sort of overall operating ratios that we'll look for. And so we'll want to see kind of what they're doing historically and kind of what we're doing pro forma. And typically what we see is kind of year 1 and 2 OpEx ratio may tick up a bit, assuming the historicals are fairly in line with reasonable expenses to operate a property. But then as we build revenue, the OpEx ratio gets a little bit better over time once we stabilize the asset, because we have our expenses are now stabilized and not growing as fast as our income has. So,
yeah, makes sense.
And so normally by the time we sort of stabilize the property in kind of year 3, we want that OpEx ratio to be kind of in line with their historics, if their historic was reasonable, or in line with kind of where we want it to be, kind of on a stabilized basis.
And do you have any rules of thumb for that, or does that really vary by asset type, location? How do you look at that, what a stabilized OpEx ratio ought to be? Yeah,
I mean, I think for the 1980s, mid-2000s large value add deals that we're buying in the markets, we're buying, it's somewhere probably between 45 and 55%, probably more like 45, 50 stabilized. That's a good sort of starting place. Anything higher than that, something to think about. Lower than that, maybe they're running it too lean. So, but it definitely does. It is a function of market, is a function of product class and type. A Class A building may have a 35% OpEx ratio because it's new, doesn't have a lot of operating expenses, and you're getting top of the market rents. Yeah.
So let's go back real quick and talk about 2 line items that I tend to see. So we sometimes get deals from other folks that want us to co-GP or look at their opportunities. And one of the places I generally see as potential glaring errors in their underwriting is taxes and insurance. So how do you underwrite taxes and insurance? Do we get, verified opinions on them? Do we actually go out and get quotes on insurance? How do we handle that in our underwriting process?
Yeah, great question. And insurance is easier than taxes, so I'll tackle that one first. So insurance, we've got consultants and insurance brokers that we'll use during the underwriting process to give us an updated quote based on kind of where the market is today, and it's moving quickly. So we've seen it be meaningful, 25%.
You're one national disaster away from a rate hike.
Yeah.
One big storm.
Yeah. So, so that's one that we can get fairly confident around. Taxes, we definitely utilize the opinions of consultants on kind of what our reassessment risk is in terms of what percent of purchase price are we likely to get tagged on for our newest assessed value. And, the more that we work in these markets and have these conversations, I think the better we've gotten at sort of from a preliminary underwriting standpoint, kind of figuring out where that ratio might be. But it's also a function of where their current assessment is too. So we're looking at historical assessments. We're looking at, has the property been stepped up? Is it stepping up over time? And really what is that delta between, historic and kind of our pro forma value? And then typically, that new tax would take effect kind of the second year of operations, because as these deals sort of get reassessed on an annual basis. So you may get a little bit of the old value year one, but depending on when the reassessment cycle is, we'll model in kind of that step up. So it could be month 6, could be month 3, could be month 9, could be month 13, depending on kind of when that steps in.
All right.
But and that that can be meaningful too.
Very meaningful.
And that's a lever that depending on how aggressive you get, it can drastically change your numbers and what you want to pay for something.
Yes. There's only a handful of things that are really big movers in a pro forma and in a business plan, and there's certainly one of them. But let's talk next about what I think is the biggest mover in your underwriting and pro forma projections, which is your exit cap rate. How do you look at an exit cap rate? What are you looking at these days, and how are you underwriting deals based on what a prudent exit cap rate ought to be?
Yeah, that's another loaded topic in this industry. We at least from an initial underwrite, our general rule of thumb is to put some cap rate expansion between what we call going in or our going in trailing. Well, let me back up. We look at a variety of different cap rates. So cap rates sort of simply is NOI divided by purchase price, right? But what NOI, right? Because Is it trailing 12 NOI, trailing 3 NOI, trailing 3 income, trailing 12 expenses? Mm-hmm. So there's a variety of different ways to chop it, and everyone defines it a little differently. So we look at 3 or 4 different versions of the cap rate. So we look at, trailing 12, trailing 3, trailing 3 tax adjusted. We look at going in, which we define as trailing 3 income, pro forma expenses, and then we look at year 1, which is pro forma income, pro forma expenses.
I'm smiling right now because how many times have you done NOI based off your broker's pro forma?
Yeah.
They man, if they could operate in the way they underwrite, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the broker, depends on the shop.
Absolutely.
They're doing their job, and I get it. And they're good at what they do. But when a broker says, "Oh, it's trailing 4.5 cap and a going in 5.25," well, what trailing and what going in, right? So you've really got to figure out. You really got to look at a variety of cap rates, at least on a trailing and kind of forward basis, to understand really what the value is you're buying today. And so we'll take that. Let's say it's a 5 cap. Let's say it ranges between 4.5 and 5.25, and we'll put basically 5 basis points of expansion a year or 10 basis points expansion a year between our whatever kind of our rough estimate of what the going in cap rate is on the exit.
Yep.
That's a good sort of starting point, kind of industry standard, no real rocket science there. But then then it's also depends on the market to a degree too. And, the last few years, I think you saw a lot of people underwriting flat cap rates between going in and exit, and you saw a lot of even cap rate compression in some instances.
A lot of cap rate compression.
And I think some of that for our equity partners and our investors, I think generally it's always some kind of expansion, just to assume that the future value of those and what an exit cap rate is saying if there's expansion is that the future value of those cash flows, albeit they are higher than today's cash flows, are going to be valued less. So that's really what that's saying. So if the cap rate's flat, you're saying that basically they're going to be valued at the same the same yield. So,
yeah, we'll save that for another episode because there's a wormhole we could go down right now relative to cap rates and market liquidity and how that all ties together and, where we are, where we're going. But we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, but I would add it, in this environment where, where things have turned a little bit, we're trying to put as much expansion in the deal as possible to still be competitive and still still try to find opportunities.
Yeah, and leave some conservatism relative to the exit assumptions. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
what makes it easier on me.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. All right. What did we miss anything, Nick? Is there anything else in the underwriting process here for part 3 of our series that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I think the only, so once we put all those ingredients into the soup, we get an outcome, right? And then it's a matter of how far off are we on purchase price, talking to the broker, talking to the management partners. And then it's just a series of iterations to see what can we refine, what can we tune to either move the price, hopefully upward, but maybe downward, depending on what the feedback is.
Yeah.
And then typically there's an investment committee process that we have internally that, when we feel like we've got it fairly well baked, there's kind of a preliminary investment process to decide if we're going to issue an LOI. And then there's kind of further refinement even between LOI and PSA, to really see where we can push the numbers if we need to, if we're kind of in a best and final situation, or if it's a competitive bid, or, if it's an off-market pocket deal, the seller, may say, yeah, that number doesn't work for us. What else can you guys do? So, it is an iterative process, really up until kind of PSA signing. But by the time we issue an LOI, we're kind of 90% there on the numbers side of things. And then it's just really a matter of kind of refining and fine tuning.
All right. Sounds good. Well, that was a great episode. Rounds out our underwriting series. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And we will see everybody on the next one.
You got it.
All right.